Okay, so this is 2 Corinthians 7, 8 through 10.
Okay.
For even though I did grieve you with my letter, I do not regret it now, though I did regret it. For I see that the letter hurt you, though only for a little while. Yet I am glad now, not because you were hurt and made sorry, but because your sorrow led to repentance and you turned back to God. For you felt a grief such as God meant you to feel, so that you might not suffer loss in anything on our account. For godly sorrow, that is in accord with the will of God, produces a repentance without regret, leading to salvation. But worldly sorrow, the hopeless sorrow of those who do not believe, produces death.
Paul did something that made them grieve. It made them not feel good. And it just seems odd that something that makes you feel bad actually can produce something good.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah. And is there certain kinds of pain that are just not, that are so painful that they can't be used for godly sorrow?
I don't know. I mean, when the disciples and everybody, after Jesus died that next day, I mean, what hope could they have had? That must have been, and what Jesus went through, it must have been the worst pain in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And yet total good came out of it.
The death and resurrection is like the template for when we experience death. And that does seem like a theme of Paul's in this book, is the death he's going through, but the good it's producing.
Martin Luther says all of life is repentance. I don't know why God designed it that way, but I do know that the hardest things I've been through, when I call on God and ask his help, it turns into beautiful fruit, right?
It's just weird that death always precedes life, and it doesn't seem like it changes. I mean, I guess once we're in life, we'll be in life permanently. But so we have a mutual friend who he lived with you guys for quite some time, and Donna was very close to him, and he and I were friends as well. And I guess it's been over a year since he committed suicide.
It'll be 2 years in October. Yeah.
Is it? Oh, it's been almost 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember we did a prayer time, he and I, it was just about a month before he passed. And I asked him if he could see the face of Jesus, and he said he could, but that Jesus was looking at him, but beyond him, with pain on his face for the hardships that were coming for him, but that he was still had hope. And I just thought, like, that's not a really great way to see the face of Jesus. Like, has life come out of that for you, or is it something that still just hurts?
So Jim was the only one out of the 34 or so people that we had in our home that God said very clearly to us, he is your son and you love him like a son. And so he's the only one that, while he lived with us for probably longer than anybody else, he was a part of our family. And I loved how good you and Donna were to him. And he's the reason we came to Vineyard. When we left our church, he spoke several times at our old church. Jim is so broken and so hurt, and he carried so much of his past with him all the time, but he loved his church, and his church loved him well.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes you and Donna. And
well, I remember when we first attended, and we weren't working at the church or anything like that. I remember being a little bit disturbed. At that time, his hair dyed black, and of course he was totally gauged. His ears had multiple, I mean, you could hardly see his ears, and I think he had tattoos up to his neck. Yeah. And it was hard to see him. And so my first impression of him wasn't, I didn't want to have to deal with him. And then of course you get to know him, and that changes. But
yeah, Jim was such a dichotomy. God had a hold of him in some beautiful ways that Satan never got his claws out either. And so I remember calling you and talking to you maybe about a month and a half or 2 months before he died, saying, I can't do this anymore. It was just such a struggle. And that'll be, I can't imagine anything else. We have such hurt and regret over that. We coulda, woulda, shoulda, but we just keep trusting God in it. There has been some wonderful good that has come out of it. We've had confirmation over and over again. We do believe Jim's with Jesus.
Yeah. To me, there's no question, just because, I mean, to me, he was the classic example of death and life side by side. And, and people think, somehow people think that, I guess it's like radical Arminianism, that if your form of death is a sin, then somehow you can't go to heaven, which is just such a distortion of the love of God. And even this section where Paul is saying it overlaps, and for him it overlapped. And maybe that's why we gather together to celebrate people's lives, is to cement that, or to remind each other, that that God wins in the end, and that and if that's true, then there's the life. There's sorrow producing life.
Just the other day, I had a young man come into the church, and I happened to end up speaking with him, Travis. And I don't know this guy from Adam, but apparently he was involved with a church years ago. And he said, "Yeah, I used to. One of my best friends was James Davies. Do you know him?" And it warmed my heart. So this, I don't want to make light of anybody's sorrows, but I don't know how I would get over any of it if I didn't look to God every time.
Yeah.
We have to be careful with appearance, just like with the earthly and the temporal, and the light and darkness. Sometimes it's obvious, but this worldly kind of grief and this godly kind of grief, they both start out the same way. They both look, it's that ugly cry, it's that brokenness, it's grief and tears and wailing and hurt. They can both look so similar. It's where you put your focus. Are you looking at God, or are you looking at yourself and all that you've been cheated out of, or all that maybe you're upset with yourself, all that you've done wrong?